Hi, everyone. Tonight, I wanted to just address the ideas of openness, humility, and courage as they relate to the ideas of relationality and futures consciousness. So, let me just explain what I mean by that. And first, maybe we'll just start with the idea of futures consciousness, because I think there may be a misunderstanding somewhat of what futures consciousness at least can be, not what it is. We can define things by different ways, of course. That's a part of humility. But I don't think that we often think of futures consciousness as well. Let me start with what we often think futures consciousness is. I think there is a general, maybe unspoken, idea that futures consciousness is sort of a mindset that is open to using the skill of futures thinking or futures literacy to achieve futures outcomes, or to position ourselves to think about the future so as to make wiser decisions, strategic decisions, innovation decisions in the here and now. So that might be one interpretation of what a futures consciousness is, having consciousness about future skills and abilities and outcomes and objects, and looking at trends and those kinds of things, and being open to that so that we think in terms of futures thinking so that we can apply it to strategy and planning and innovation today. Then there is probably a lesser idea of what futures consciousness is. And that's the one I want to address tonight, that I think is much more important than the former one. Because if we address futures consciousness as a subset, or I actually believe as an overlay of collective consciousness, I think, as a matter of fact, you could almost say futures consciousness, you might be surprised by this, but hear me out. Futures consciousness and collective consciousness are the same thing. So let me get to that just a minute, because remember I said openness, humility, and courage in terms of relationality and futures consciousness. So now that means that futures consciousness is more about the heart set, the soul set, and the mindset, yes, but not a mechanical mindset, more of a deep dive into looking towards awe and wonderment and enchantment. Being open to emergence, not what we try to make emerge, not what the system is feeding us in terms of the trends that are coming from the system that we're in, but rather looking or being open to or aligning with or flowing with the cracks in the system. Not the doors, as Bayo Kumalafe would say. The system still created that door, even if it's an exit door. But the cracks in the system, which either are the places where the system is faltering and that we can see transformation beyond that, or sort of like, something from a sci-fi movie where we see a realm beyond the one that we're in right now. So you see a crack and you're seeing through into another realm. Maybe the upside down. And in that sense, that we're looking for these cracks because we're seeing the transformative realities beyond the system that we're living in. And that's where futures consciousness plays a greater role, because it allows us to dive into a greater sense of what it means to be conscious. Now, very important here to understand what I mean when I'm talking about this kind of consciousness, because I'm not talking about the awakening of the mind to be able to perceive the world around us and perceive time and space, and therefore I must be conscious, I think, therefore I am. But I'm talking about consciousness as a fundamental reality, a non-reductive reality in the universe that is driving our place in the universe, as well as kin, planet, and cosmos. It could be said, or put another way to understand this, it could be said that consciousness is the reality of the universe itself working through us and the rest of life to make itself aware, to manifest itself, and to realize itself. And it's realizing itself through us and through the rest of the universe. And so in that sense, where consciousness is not a neurological or a cognitive awakening, it's a tapping into what the cosmos wants to do for life itself, as Robert Rosen would say, so that we understand that evolutionary directionality, what's trying to unfold, what's emerging for the health of people plus kin, plus planet, plus cosmos as one collective consciousness or collective entity. Why is that similar to futures consciousness, or is futures consciousness an overlay of collective consciousness? Because we might think about consciousness as being in the now, but futures consciousness says, I'm aware of ancestors past, present, and future, what has unfolded, what is unfolding now, and what wants to unfold. As a matter of fact, I heard somebody say the other day that all we really have are relationships in the now. All we really have are relationships that we can perceive of in the present. And so really past and future aren't as important to us because we can only play in the now. And I would say that that's partially true because the now is an expression of past, present, and future. And we have to be aware that we're tapping into not just cosmos, planet, and kin, and what wants to emerge, but we're tapping into what has come before, what is yet to come, and what is now, and both of those playing into the now. So you might think about that as the three horizons as well, in a play, in a metaphor, so to speak. So getting back, so now that you understand what I mean by futures consciousness, tapping into consciousness as an irreducible and fundamental element in the universe that wants to manifest itself through us and through the rest of life itself, and pulls all of that together. And it's not just a mindset that allows us to skill up and have literacy about what tools and methodologies are important. That's very important because it's not skill-based, it's life-based. It's not skill-based, it's life-based. And in that sense, it's very important for us to understand relationality, right? You've already heard me talking about that. It's in relationships that we are able to understand what wants to emerge, the ecotonic space between people and kin, between people and planet, between people and cosmos is where all the magic happens, the wonderment, the awe, and the enchantment of life itself. Featuring in the fog, not outside the fog, not in the light, not where things are already exposed, but where things are liminal and aren't exposed is where we find all of the goodness. And so in that sense, it's very important for us, this is where I'll end now, to be aware of how open we are, how humble we are being, and how much courage we have. So I saw a great post the other day about courage that is just fantastic, but I talked about courage a little bit differently because I love this post that I saw. Courage to really speak out what we feel is wanting to emerge from us, and are the passions that we are inhabiting, the place we're inhabiting, the liminalities of the understanding that we're wanting to inhabit, and having the courage to speak that truth. I love that. I'm talking about courage a little bit differently here, and this is the courage to be open and humble. And what do I mean by open and humble? Well, it's the many-eyed whole again. You often hear me talking about the dragonfly as not just a metaphor and a symbol, it is a metaphor and a symbol, but also as a biological, psychological, and sacred reality that you see in the dragonfly's eye, made up of millions of nodes that come together to give it the ability to make an eye that sees the whole. And that doesn't mean that it sees with certainty what is, or that it's unseen. It's neither about seeing nor not seeing. The whole is about a state of ever emerging, unique understanding of how we all fit together without becoming cookie cutters. As a matter of fact, if we lost our diversity of ideology, of culture, of our differences, our passions, our purposes, then we wouldn't have a whole. You'll just have a straight line. You'll have a flat line. You'll have a two-dimensional surface. The whole, like the dragonfly's eye, is 360. It sees up and down and side to side and backwards and forwards all at the same time. And that's always emerging. It sees in this environment, and it can understand what wants to emerge, what's trying to emerge, what's about to emerge. And that's why the dragonfly acts with the speed and the anticipation, the resilience and the transformation that it does. But biologically, we have that trait through the collective, the connective, the cooperative, the co-creative, that gets buried by modernity, coloniality, and that causes greater siloing and separation. We've siloed everything, we separate everything, and you tend to, when you do that, lose over a time the understanding of that diverse, collective, connective, cooperative, co-creative, creating a many-eyed whole that can see what wants to emerge, and it's a literal biological, psychological, and sacred trait that we as humans and together with the rest of life itself have to be able to understand what wants to emerge. It is an actual trait, an innate trait that doesn't get practiced because we're taught so much to think about how we heal ourselves, which is, I'm not saying that's unimportant, but how we heal ourselves, how we think for ourselves, my degree, my job, my silos, separation, you get the idea, extraction and exploitation. So again, I'm not talking about cookie cutter. If we're not diverse, we cannot create a 360 whole, because I need a piece to look back there, I need a piece to look up here, but for it to all be part of one eye so that we can understand what wants to emerge. That takes great humility. And that takes great openness, because that means that I cannot just say my way of seeing the world and the things that I see are the only right things to see and the only right way to see it. But I start to understand that I'm always on a journey of liminality, a journey of openness all the time, so that I see other ways of seeing the world, multiple ways of knowing, multiple ways of understanding, multiple ways of grokking and embracing and embodying. And I'm able to say, wow, I wasn't raised in that culture. I probably don't have the deepest understanding of that, but I'm learning from that. And then the next year or the next month or the next 10 years, I'm learning from other things that I never understood before. I'm on a continual path of openness. That openness creates greater connection to the many-eyed whole, that relationality, which is relational emergence. What wants to emerge always happens in relationship. What wants to thrive is always in relationship, right? And so that is a future's consciousness that is well beyond a practice, a field, a discipline, a skill, a set of tools and methodologies, and especially well beyond trend hunting, which is coming from the system we're already in. Remember, again, if I'm really employing imaginal anticipation, I'm not looking at what's inside the walls of our system. I'm trying to see what's outside the system, the cracks in the system, and the flow with that. And that only happens in relational emergence, relational thriving. In those ecotonic spaces in between, the good stuff happens in between. And so that's so important that I have the courage to be open, that I have the courage to be humble. The most humble thing we can do is be in relationship. It is the most humble thing we can do. And to live an entire life of saying, I haven't seen it all yet, and I probably never will. I most likely never will. I never will. That's the most humble of all, right? And that way I see that my only place to tap into future consciousness is not individually. I'm going to say something bold as I end this video. You cannot by yourself tap into future's consciousness. It only happens in relationship. And I'll see you soon.